So, Danielle, welcome to What Lights Us Up. I'm so excited to inspire everyone to travel back to their past and to understand their family roots. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here.
I am so excited to talk about my family roots and your family roots. We're both Italian American. And I have been feeling a calling to go back to my own family roots after publishing my cookbook, and I called it Cooking with Italian Roots. And then I went back to the town where my grandfather was born to study the food culture of my ancestry last September, so 2 years ago now. And I've gone back twice now, and it's been an incredible experience to meet cousins I never met and just to understand, walk around this town and really get a feeling of this is truly like where I come from. And the feeling of that is like so incredible and something you can't even describe to someone unless they actually like step foot in really where their ancestors dated back, right, for generations. And it's an incredible feeling. And you have built a business from your own family roots, offering tours, both where your grandmother is from in Italy and also where your great grandparents had a business on the famous Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, which if anyone listening isn't familiar with it, it's a famous Italian American street in the Bronx with a lot of Italian businesses and food shops and all kinds of things. What inspired your journey to go back to your roots?
I think it's, kind of the simple advice that my grandmother would always give and that I continue to remind myself all the time of all the time, which is just do the best with what you have. And the Arthur Avenue tours were the first thing really. So I studied art history. I went to graduate school in Florence. I was working in the museum world, and the museum world is wonderful. And lots of people will think, it's very glamorous, but the truth of the matter is it just doesn't pay very well. And you kind of, a lot of people in the museum world have another source of income, whether it's a spouse or a family. And I was just picking up extra work. And somebody actually asked me, it was somebody well known, Melissa Clark of the New York Times, vis-a-vis Twitter, and a friend got in touch with me because there were a group of food buyers from Marks and Spencer department store in London who were in New York City. They were food developers, and they were going to all these different neighborhoods just to collect inspiration. And they asked her to do a tour of Arthur Avenue. And she had done a few other tours, but she didn't know Arthur Avenue, and got in touch with me, and I led them around, and they paid me $500 in cash, which to somebody working in a museum was like, that was a nice little afternoon off. And I had the idea at that moment that I could be leading food tours. A food tour, this was in 2010, was kind of not really a thing yet, but what was a thing was Anthony Bourdain and no reservations. And so then I started shaping this idea as though it were an episode of No Reservations, because I was and still am an Anthony Bourdain super fan. And so it grew from there, and it was a one-off thing. And at first it was more just history and culture. And then I added in the tastings, and I really just continued to incorporate feedback from other people. And as the industry grew, I took notes and I went on other food tours, and I kind of figured it out. So I was doing those food tours while I had my museum job for 8 years. And then eventually it grew, and I was able to hire other people. So it took a while, but I wasn't even necessarily thinking of it as a business at first. I was just thinking of it as extra money. But it was kind of like my story, the origin there, the things that I knew, and I think the authenticity of the fact that my grandparents had been on that street since 1918, and I had all of these personal connections because of that history. It was, my great grandparents, my grandparents, uncles that were there until the 90s, and the shop that they owned is still there. That was something that was really attractive to people. And I think, there are a lot of food tours. There are a lot of tour companies that are very corporate, and they have beautiful websites and seamless integrations when you check out. I tried to do those things, but of course I'm not a big company, but I think authenticity is something that's much harder to find. So I lean heavy on that.
I love that motto, do the best with what you have.
Yeah. And
That's
and the Italy tours were a similar thing. I during the course of working on these food tours, I was also writing a food blog with a friend, something that was purely for fun. I did a book review, a cookbook review of Arthur Schwartz's cookbook. Arthur Schwartz used to be the food critic of the Daily News. He was like a big deal in New York City for a certain generation. And I wrote this review and it was very favorable. It was just a silly blog. But nonetheless, he read it and he reached out to me and he invited me to lunch. And he is a Jewish guy from Brooklyn who knows Italian food better than anybody in the world. And we just got on like a house on fire, even though he's, old enough to be my dad. We were like best friends. And he was running a cooking school in Paestum, Italy, where my family's from. He invited his business partner from Italy to lunch. We had lunch together on Arthur Avenue with Arthur Schwartz. Talk about synchronicity. And she said to me, her name is Cecilia. I said to Cecilia, my grandmother's from this town, but now that my grandmother has passed away, all the relatives that I was in contact with that would come visit us when I was a kid, they're all, the contact has ceased. And she said, oh, you know that your cousins are building a hotel, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know anything. Anyway, she went back and gave them my business card with my phone number, and they called me. And one of the members of the older generation called me on the phone and invited me to come. But then he said, well, look up my kids on this thing called Facebook. And there I met my cousins who were my age and saw their faces, and we started communicating and did one tour and slowly started putting everything together.
How amazing. So that's something that I've experienced too, connecting with cousins that I didn't know. And it's been an amazing experience just to learn how another culture lives and actually be immersed in that culture and really have that. In Italy, it's very different when you visit them in Italy. It's like everyone sits together and they eat together every meal, lunch and dinner, and they live next door to each other.
Yeah.
Where in the US, we've sort of lost that. I remember, where my dad grew up and my grandparents grew up, they lived next door to each other. They lived down the street. And there was a little area in Connecticut where I'm from called Town Plot. It's like a little Italian area and similar to New Haven, where there's like these Italian sections, just like Arthur Avenue, right? There's the Italian sections of the Northeast where your family sort of immigrated to. And then they sort of all lived together. And there was the Italian, the bakery, the deli, the store, the market, whatever. And everyone's recipes were all similar. And then there was like the church festival and all of that. And we grew up with that. My grandmother would host meals of 30 of us together like every Sunday. And I grew up with that feeling of family, where I come from, who my great grandmother was. But for some of us, those generations, and now everyone has passed, like you said, and we no longer hear those stories that we may have taken for granted when they were alive. How do you think we can connect with our ancestry if we have not heard those stories firsthand? And what do you think connecting with our ancestry can help us find?
I think it's such a powerful thing. And, I have so many clients that will come to me and they start off saying, oh, I want to take this trip to Venice or Tuscany. And then I look at their last name and I'm like, so that's cool. We can do that. But where's your family from in Italy? And, it's Sicily or Calabria. And then I start trying to push them southward. But one thing I will say is, not everybody wants that experience. I see even within my family, I have cousins that have no interest in going to Italy, whereas I go there and it's a full circle moment where I feel complete. But if you're one of those people, if it calls you even a little bit, then you got to go. And, we're fortunate to be Italian because I get frustrated sometimes when I hear Italian Americans bemoaning like, oh, everything's gone. It's all over. It's all changed now. And I'm like, well, it's not like, the Cossacks destroyed our town in Russia. Like we can go, we're not like people who are Jewish or African American who can't go back to their ancestral towns. We can, which is such an amazing privilege that we should really take advantage of. And we can reconnect with the language. And I do have clients who do want to go back to their ancestral town where there's nobody left. And what I usually do for them or suggest is that they do a cooking class there, because that is something that you actually can recapture. That's a ritual, a tradition, a sensory experience that your ancestors had that you can reincarnate and you can add it back in. Maybe it was lost in the family line, but you can add it right back in seamlessly. and even more so than ever before, because you can get every ingredient under the sun online. So you really can make it. And you could buy honey or you could buy flour from that place and then in a way become part of that community through your cooking. So yeah, if it calls you, you absolutely have to go back to those places. And even if you do come from another culture where the origin place is no longer there, I think getting as close as you can just lend so much clarity. I mean, I feel this for myself, and I've heard many other people say it, like ways of being, expressions that I had, reactions that I have when I was there made sense. And a lot of my Italian friends and my Italian family, they always crack up. They say, "You're an Italian trasvestita, cross-dressed," which doesn't translate quite the same way in English, but basically like you're an imposter American. You're actually an Italian, but it's like you were born in the wrong place. And it's a joke, but it's true. When I'm there, I feel most myself and I feel most comfortable in my own skin. I grew up with my grandmother next door. My whole family left the Bronx and moved to the New York suburbs and lived on the same street. And we were the weird Italians who all lived together. But I grew up with my grandmother every day after school. So I grew up in Carpaccio with her and her language and food traditions. So when I went to real Carpaccio, I was very much home.
That's amazing. And you're so right. When I was in my grandfather's town, I learned to cook with, or I cooked with my cousin's cousin. I had met her for the first time, but it turned out that her last name, I think it's her great grandmother and my great great grandmother were sisters, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. But we had never met. I didn't know she was related. And she's lived in that town her entire life, and she knows the traditional recipes of that town, like the snail sauce and the petole and the porridge food that they would make that my grandfather used to talk about having when he was little. And recipes you can't even find online. And I cooked with her, and she doesn't speak any English and I don't speak any Italian, but there is this beautiful language that happens when we're cooking together, and it's like a universal language of cooking, and you really feel immersed in the culture. And when I see her, I went back for the second time this past September, and it was like we're family. She was
Yeah.
so excited to see me, and it's this amazing feeling. And I'm actually hosting a retreat next September. I felt so called from this experience, like you said, that I wanted to share this sort of living what it is like to experience life in a small Italian village that you would never go to on a tour, and come and cook with my family, and come and have food with my family, and come and 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 come to the festival that is celebrating the food culture of this town and of this ancient castle village, because there is something that you can learn about yourself. You can discover presence, slowing down, immersion.
Time
And
goes slowly, more slowly there. Even when I'm there and I've got my laptop and I'm busy and I'm working and I'm doing everything and living a modern life, and yet I'm like, wow, it's only 2 o'clock. How is that possible? But time definitely goes much more slowly there. Which town is your family from?
Castelmarone, which is up on the hill of Caserta.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it's a very tiny, tiny, tiny little village. Like,
Mhm.
not one person speaks English. Thankfully, I have one cousin who I knew growing up. She lived in New Haven for 20 years. So when I grew up, she came to all the parties. So she speaks English.
Mhm.
And she has the same last name as me. And her father was my grandfather's um, cousin, first cousin by half brother, something like that. So we're like third cousins. But when I reached out to her, she's like, come stay with my sister, come stay with my niece. We'll host you. And now it's like I talk to them for Christmas. It's like I want to go back and I just like live with them. We have lunch, we have dinner, and it's just like it's like I'm part of the family. It's incredible. We'll go to the flea market together and go shopping, and it's amazing, incredible. And you said something else, that you feel most alive when in Italy. It's something that I've been on a journey to find more joy in my life, to follow what lights me up. It's the title of this podcast. How can someone find more of what lights them up if they're feeling lost?
I think you have to be curious and follow your curiosity and just go there with it. And I think, living with our phones telling us what to do all the time, it's easy to fall down a rabbit hole of like just scrolling and I don't know, finding something silly like watching too many cat videos in a row. But that's very different than actually following your curiosity and like following the breadcrumbs of what lights you up. And I think we're almost all, I find this in the world of travel now. Like I have many clients who are, my age, I would say like Gen X, who are all of a sudden very nervous about traveling. And I said, hey, when you traveled before, when you were young, there was no Google Maps, there was no Airbnb, there was no Google Translate, and you did great. Like remember that language is actually a chemistry, which I think you've experienced. You don't speak Italian, your relatives don't speak English. Human connection is such a powerful thing, and so if you're curious, you really do ignite something that we're unfortunately losing, which is the most natural thing to us as human animals on this planet. And we don't have to really work that hard. We just have to move some technology to the side and follow the breadcrumbs of curiosity.
Yeah, follow the breadcrumbs for sure. It's like I was telling you before we hit record that I feel like we were introduced by synchronicity, and it was just like, a mutual person that knows both of us was like, you guys have to connect. And I do believe that everyone that I invite on this podcast is meant to be in my life, or I'm meant to learn something from them, or I'm meant to connect with them. And it's this community that I'm building myself. I'm sure you feel that with your tours, even people that come on your tours. It's a
Yeah,
sense of connection. People travel for connection.
absolutely. And it's one of the places where you really can be present, because you really want to be on your vacation. Sometimes maybe at the beginning of the end of the trip, you're starting to think about, oh, I miss my dog, or I hope my kids are okay, or I hope my house is okay. But usually when you're there, you really want to be there and you want to enjoy that day, and you've invested in that day. And so whatever it is you've chosen to do, you're excited to be there. And that is part of that feeling of being alive, which is another reason too why I just encourage people when they're traveling to connect to people as much as possible, and experiences like cooking classes, because the more tapped in and human your experience, the more memorable it's going to be, and it's going to be more memorable as a result of having been so present.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about, we get so busy. We get caught up in the busyness. Like you said, you're in Italy and you're like, it's only 2 o'clock. And we get so caught up in, or even if you're traveling and you have so much on your list you want to see, and you're trying to like get it done as fast as possible, but slowing down and actually immersing yourself in a culture, I find has been more beneficial, at least for me, to when I travel, or when I do really even when I'm hiking, even if I'm with a new friend, it is an experience that I will look back on and remember, wow, I was really present during that. I remember looking at the tree bark and the carvings in the tree. And I think I was telling you before I hit record, you have a podcast, and I was listening to your podcast, and you had talked about sitting in a church in Italy and imagining all the people that came before you that sat in that church, and what that their experience was, and how many people and generations were there in that building before you. I mean, that is a sense of presence.
It is. And then to think about how much more presence people would have had in the past too, because that would be where you would go to hear music. That might be the only place where you go where that's clean and smells like incense and doesn't have animals in it. A church like that, the way a church was designed, especially in the past, was meant to be a vessel for awe and wonder. It was a place to leave behind the dirty, dusty outside world, enter the space, and have a transformative experience. And so when you go into churches, and a lot of people again in the travel world will say, I don't go to churches. I'm like, oh my God, the churches are the best places. And it has nothing to do with your personal religion or your faith. But these spaces, especially ones that, I think have just been prayed in for centuries, they have a certain resonance. And if you can just, calm down, sit down, even if it's just to cool off or warm up, you can usually feel something and connect to the metaphysical Wi-Fi.
Totally, totally. And how can we remind ourselves to find more presence when we're traveling?
stop worrying, stop being, too caught up with, I got to see this. You got to leave behind the peer pressure. And I think you have to prioritize experience. Now, in any trip, you're going to have a few bucket list things that you want to see. You're going to want to go to the Colosseum or the Eiffel Tower or whatever it is. And, do those things, but don't be overwhelmed by them. And if you're truly not excited to go see these things, then don't. Or walk by outside and cross it off the list. But I think it's really important to think about what you want to experience, what you want to feel, what you want to be telling people about your trip when you came back, and really not buying in it. And I think, especially because of social media, I see this all the time from my clients. We design an itinerary and then they come back to me a couple of weeks later and they're like, well, my neighbor said, like, if I don't go to Positano, I'm really missing out. And I'm like, you're really not. You're going to trust me on this one. You got to prioritize experience. That to me is the key. And then, your budget is also going to take care of a lot of the practicalities as well. So there's certainly going to be a portion of figuring out, like, yeah, I'd like to do that, but I can't afford that. Or let me skip these two things to prioritize spending the money on this amazing cooking class, because this is the experience that I most value. Who cares if it's expensive? If it's the most valuable thing to me personally, then it's worth every penny.
And I think getting clear on how you want to feel from that experience will help plan where you're going to go, what you're going to do. If you want to feel connection, if you want to feel presence, if you want to feel joy, and get clear on your values, like, what do you want to experience? It's really, I think, really important. Now, your podcast called Tante Belle Cose, All the Beautiful Things, you created it because you wanted to feature the undiscovered places of Italy. And, right? Go ahead.
Well, I really started it first, just began as a newsletter on Substack, because I did begin this journey as an art historian, and there's just lots of things that I like to geek out on, and there's a limited audience for people that like my geeky stuff. But it has been growing, and I've been finding my people, which is one of the wonderful things about Substack as a platform, is you really can find your people. And then I have been a guest on another Italy podcast, a repeat guest, and really so many people told me how much they enjoyed my episodes, and so I decided to start doing my own. So it's my vehicle for being a complete history nerd, as well as sharing. I really feel like the mission in my history work, even when I worked at the museum and was a staff lecturer and was in charge of dispensing very scholarly information, is to give people a sense of awe and wonder. And art is one of the best vehicles for that. Art and music. I think music is even more powerful, but I have zero musical talent. So art is my vehicle. And if I can, impart that, I really do try in every single episode to add that ingredient in. If I can accomplish that, then I really feel like I've done my work.
I love that. And you opened, I think it was your first episode, about sort of getting those undiscovered places featured and talking about them from Italy. And so often we don't see, because of the the algorithms of social media, we see the top places, like you said, the Colosseum, the perfect beach, the crowded place, and we don't see the smaller villages, the experiences of a cooking class. All of the places that, the church that you visited that made such a impact on your feelings and your experience of going to that small little village in Italy. And so I want to talk about that, because I think even if we're not talking about travel, I think we do see an influx of what the top news story is, or the top travel destination and the top art piece, but we may not see the most beautiful piece, maybe from an artist that we've never heard of.
Oh, absolutely. And I think especially it comes to food. I think of some of the trending things on TikTok and social media that people are doing. I've gone on about this far too many times, but it's the best example. There's this sandwich in Florence that everybody lines up for. And I can think of about 200 things that are more delicious to eat than that stupid sandwich. But people are like, but I gotta do it because everybody's doing it. And I'm like, you really don't. You really, really don't. Yeah, social media is such a force. And, it makes perfect sense. I don't I don't want people to feel like I'm sort of like, turning my nose up at them for using social media as a resource. The truth is, it's harder to find good travel information than ever before. The algorithms are in charge, though. Influencers are making content based on what's trending. I would make a lot more money in my business with whether it's subscriptions or with, attracting clients if I prioritized those places. So people that are making their money as content creators, they're making the money. I don't blame them, but they are absolutely not showing the best stuff. They are showing the places that a hotel paid them to visit. They are, taking a shot in the one place where there's no like electricity lines and it just looks perfect. You see people, especially I work in Italy, just a little bit south of the Amalfi Coast in an area called Cilento. You can see the Amalfi Coast from the beach in Pestum. And when you see these influencers in Positano, in a crowd of real people, you realize how ridiculous they look. So much makeup on, the dress covered in lemons. I mean, they look absolutely ridiculous, but on camera, they look like they fit right into the environment. And all that stuff is fun. You want to go have a spritz and take a picture in the famous spot? Go for it. It's a souvenir, right? We all like souvenirs, but don't build your trip around that, because you are just chasing a mirage, and your time and your money. I mean, I don't care how much money you have to spend. I don't care if you're filthy rich. Your time is still extremely valuable. And if you're running around chasing all of these images that you saw on TikTok and you're not prioritizing experience, it's all a waste.
What travel tips do you have for us? Like big travel tips for Italy? I mean, I feel like you know so many places in Italy, undiscovered and popular places. Like what do we need to know about going to Italy?
So many things. Let's see. I'm gonna try to rattle off a bunch of them. Cilento instead of Amalfi Coast, like Amalfi was 50 years ago. Abruzzo instead of Tuscany. Le Marche instead of Umbria. Everybody says get there early, go in the morning. Worst advice in the entire travel industry: go late in the afternoon. All the cruise ships, all the Rick Steves bus tours, everybody goes in the morning. Go to the Vatican at 3:30 when there's not 5 gazillion people pushing in behind you. Go when the crowd is thinning. Go to Pompeii in the afternoon at sunset, because the archaeological park closes at sunset. Um, Try to talk to people even if you don't speak a word of Italian, or learn just a little bit of Italian, because Italians are essentially hospitable people. When you go to Florence, if you're not going to go look at art in museums, if you're like, I'm not an art person, you might as well just flush your money down the toilet. Go to places where you're actually going to want to participate in the experience. If you're an outdoorsy person, you can do that in Italy. If you're a museum person, you can do that in Italy. The beauty of that tiny little country is that you've got everything. You've got a Mediterranean climate, you have an alpine climate, you've got plains, you've got completely flat land for biking in Puglia. So prioritize what it is that's going to light you up, to come back to your theme, of course, and then do that versus, kind of just doing a standard tour, because you're not going to enjoy it. And those popular places are super crowded. And if you really truly want to do the popular places, Florence, Venice, Rome, they are worthy, but try to do them in the off season. If it's only July that you have available, really try to do something else, and then, smash a few sick days together or something and try to do those popular places in the off season.
I love that. Thank you for the tips. And I haven't been to some of those places, so I should definitely check them out. But I will say it was something I didn't think to do, but I was solo going to my family's town, and I rented a car for the first time in September. And I don't speak the language. Like I said, I'm learning, but I could read a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and I was okay driving by myself. Now, granted, I had to rent automatic, and the
Mhm.
automatic car was super big in the small little towns, and everyone knew I was the Americana. But I was still able to get around, and it allowed me to go explore other towns. I was able to go to the mozzarella factory and go to the flea market and do things. I didn't have to rely on my cousins to drive me. And it was, and I went to a tomato experience down in Naples. And so it was to get around. Sometimes, I know the trains are very easy to get around, but having a car I thought was really nice as well.
The fast train system is great, and those will get you between the major cities, but the trains in between are less so. They're better connected in northern Italy. In southern Italy, you really need a car. The one place that you don't want to drive is within Naples itself. I mean, I drive in New York City, and I refuse to drive in Naples. I will pick up my car at the airport. That's my personal hack. I take a taxi to the airport. The rental desk is right at the entrance of the highway, and then you hop on the highway, and it's fine. Yeah, it's very easy. I find it easy to drive in Italy. People tailgate you, but just like let them do it, and you do you, and there's no problem.
Yeah. So what has brought you the most joy in this whole experience? I mean, we didn't talk that much about your Arthur Avenue experience. What should people want to experience on Arthur Avenue? Like what can they experience when you take them on a tour there in your own hometown?
The underlying mission there is just to help sustain this completely unique enclave of shops in New York City, which is a rapacious financial hell beast that consumes everything in its path, and yet we have this enclave of these small family-run food businesses. Over 6, 7 of them are over 100 years old. I mean, it's absolutely crazy that they still exist. Uh, it's it's this monkish devotion that the folks there have, and the fact that they've been there so long that their overhead is low, their mortgages and their rents are all paid. So what I'm really trying to do, and what makes me feel so satisfied, is when I have people that come on our tour, and the tour is called the shopping and tasting tour because it's really meant to be an initiation into all of the great things there are to buy there, with the hope that they'll come back. And they do. I run into people every single week who say, I come back at least once a month. I've got a cooler in the car, or I took an Uber, and I do my shopping here, especially at the holiday time too. I'll see lots of people. Maybe they come back just once a year, but they come back and they go shopping, and they spend a few $100s stocking up on meat and fish and bread and cheese. So that makes me really happy, because I feel like I'm making a positive contribution to New York City, my home, and to small businesses and to traditions, and it means these businesses will be around for at least another year.
I love that. And I'm embarrassed to say I've never been to Arthur Avenue, I don't think.
Well, it's funny. The reason it's also survived is because it's kind of in an area that it's not easy to get to. It's actually easiest to drive there. In this case, good parking is what's kept the neighborhood alive, because people that live in Westchester and Connecticut and New Jersey can actually drive in, versus Mulberry Street, Little Italy, and Manhattan, which is, you just simply can't drive there. There's nowhere to park your car, and therefore you're not going to do a lot of shopping. Um, so a lot of people haven't been there because it's not near anything. I mean, it's near the zoo and it's near the Botanical Garden and Fordham University, but if you're going to those places, they're their own world. So you really have to make it a point to go to Arthur Avenue. And so for those that are making a point to go and don't know what they're doing, that's where we are, to greet them and show them all the best stuff, to just give them the keys to our Italian American kingdom.
I love that. I'm gonna do it someday. I'm gonna come and visit you and take me around. So, how can someone find more joy in their life, and what has brought you the most joy in everything that you've done?
The most joy I find is when I'm able to create an experience and other people are able to connect around it. I'm a creative person. I've never been a person who's good at Excel spreadsheets, which is why I've had to take this crazy circuitous career path. When people ask me how I did it, I said, please don't take any advice from me. I would be go don't do something much more straightforward. But for me, being able to create something, to do the best with what I have, and really any work that I do, whether it's designing an itinerary or a tour, I see it as a very creative project and an expression of my ideas and of my heart. And when then people are able to connect even deeper from that, it's very satisfying. Most recently, I've been doing these workshops with an artist named Jenny Kroik. And synchronicity, I saw her work on the cover of the New Yorker. I sent her a fan message, a DM on Instagram. Turns out she lived across the street from me in Manhattan. And we became friends. Just such a crazy thing. But she's an amazing illustrator. She's been on the cover of the New Yorker several times. And she has now been to Italy 3 times leading an artist workshop. And the people that have come together for that tour are all there to seek beauty. And they're different than regular tours. I mean, you get all types. Sometimes tours can be really difficult if people are finding problems. Oh, my pillow's too hard, blah, blah, blah. These tours are all people that are just there looking at the light and the shadows and wow, isn't this pear just amazing? Their eyes are so attuned to beauty, and that is the best experience that I've had. And then you see them connect and people stay in touch and the WhatsApp groups keep going a year later. That's the best stuff.
Presence and experience.
Yeah. And then sharing those things. I think that's the thing about the workshop, because everybody's there on the same page. And they're all there to create something, but they're really there to be open, to look, to feel, to see. And then when they start sharing those things, it just compounds.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And creating connection too.
Yeah.
With the group, with
So many of these people are in touch, and they're continuing to get together, and I'm staying in touch with them. And 2 of the people from that first group are doing new branding and a logo for me. They came to me, and yeah, that just, those connections. I wouldn't never have met any of these people in any other way. And I call every one of them friends, even though they were clients who came to me, with money, and I provided a service. But it's so much richer than that now.
I love that. Just because you followed a passion, you created a community. I love that. So thank you so much. Where can everyone find you, follow you, book your tours?
So you can find me at feasttravel.com. It's also feast2_travel on Instagram. And from there, there are links to the podcast, the Substack newsletter. If you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the episodes are completely free. We do have a small subscriber community if you'd like to join us. But Feast Travel is the portal for all of it. And then separately, there is Arthur Avenue Food Tours. The other side of the business, of course, is practicality. And fortunately, after a lot of hard work, if you just Google Arthur Avenue Food Tours, I will come right up.
And I'll link everything in the show notes. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for coming on and having this conversation. I'm sure everyone loves Italy. I don't know who doesn't. So I'm so excited to share the travel tips and connection and create more community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.